Okay, so you see the small triangular building, that's a solar shed that I built. It uses two older 70-watt panels, 140 watts total. I'm using a 10 amp charge controller on that. The larger square building actually houses a water tank. And so what this is, it's the water tank had originally not been inside of a housing. So that was built after the fact. But we had to have a way of pumping water from the water tank into the buildings. So no power out here. So what happens is I scrounged materials for this. This is all salvage lumber. It's all 2x, and it was pretty heavily warped. Using the cordless power tools, recharged off of the system actually as I built it. And a nail gun to speed up the process. So it's all older 2x lumber, but as I cut into it, I could figure out the good parts from the bad parts. And so it kind of has that old barn look because it's old wood. And production costs on this really low. The thing is, even in this snowy weather, it's been 100% functional, which is great because we can look inside here. It uses my system. As long as you're staying under 15 amps, you're safe doing this. But it uses my system of using common AC power plug stuff. Okay, let's see if we can get this thing open. What happens is when the wood swells, it kind of shuts itself. There we go. No latch needed. Just a lot of tension on there. The brick weighs it down because we thought maybe we had some wind going on here. The rocks were kind of built up. This is on another rock. To add a little weight and stability to the thing, because it's not really attached to the ground. Just a lot of weight in there. And the brick was a counterweight for the battery. And a placeholder in case we're going to add a second battery. Solar land charge controller. 10 amp. Been a really good unit. Using, I think, number 12 wire in there. Didn't have the right little wire nut adapter, so I just did a twisty thing here. Seems to work fine. Running from the panels to the charge controller, and then from the charge controller to the battery. And then from the charge controller to an AC style outlet that is actually running DC. Again, triple, quadruple check your polarity when you're doing this, because you have to remain consistent through the system. And the two plugs on there, one plug will run off of those modified Ryobi and DeWalt tool chargers that I showed in the other videos. It's a lot better than using cigarette lighter plugs, which can give you a bad connection if they back out just slightly. Using a good heavy duty 12-3 power cord, what I'm doing here is that the 12 volt power has a lot of line loss when you go over any distance. No matter how thick your cable is, you're going to end up with some line loss. So I keep a really short wire run to the first battery. It goes back to the charge controller basically to control the output for this plug, which goes to a pretty heavy duty cable that goes to another battery bank that's inside the water building. And so what happens is, if this battery drops below 12 volts, it'll shut the system off. But as long as it stays topped off, it continues feeding power downstairs to a much larger AGM battery in there. If the AGM battery drops down, we're able to use that thing all the way down to 10 volts on the water pump that it runs. Now, if that drops down and stays consistently dropped down and the little light isn't blinking here, then what will happen is we can pull a vehicle up to here and recharge that battery with a vehicle without backfeeding and getting crazy onto this thing. The other thing is, because we've got batteries of different types and capacities, I run a charge controller in between the two batteries. And it seems to work really well. Total cost on this was way the hell under $1,000. It was like the minimum that somebody quoted to solarize the system. The water pump itself was a few hundred, but we were able to stay well under budget with this outfit. I've got a lot more solar going on at this location. It's just the weather preventing a lot of final installation right now. And look for more updates on my channel, but this is basically a kind of a prepper retreat place, and not prepping for anything in particular, just basically trying to run an off-grid farm. But with an off-grid farm without the vulnerabilities of being on the grid. And so this is the solarized water supply system, little triangular shaped shed. And I can also use this as the backup tool recharging system for the cordless power tools, which when it was originally put up, it was the primary recharging point. It became the primary recharging point after I went from the small power system that I detailed in that little 4 or 5 video series. This is basically still a small system. It's still under 10 amps. I would still call this a very small off-grid system. Sufficient for somebody who's doing the real, nearly primitive living. But we're working on a much larger system here so that the house is just regular stuff. And more later.